The grand marble lobby of the L'Amour Luxe Hotel in New York pulsed with quiet elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above velvet chairs and polished mahogany. It was the kind of place where people whispered, not shouted, where money was felt, not flaunted. But this morning the illusion shattered. "I asked for a deluxe suite avec vue sur le parc," Charles Beaumont's voice echoed, thick with irritation. "And you dare not understand a word of French in a hotel of this caliber?" Behind the front desk, Samantha Green, a young, polite front desk associate, froze. She clutched her tablet tighter, her cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry, sir. Could you repeat that in English, please?" Charles scoffed, loud enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "Typical. This is what hospitality looks like in America? No class, no language, no brains." People turned. A mother pulled her child a little closer. A businessman lowered his phone. The golden silence of the lobby turned cold. Beside Charles, a woman in designer sunglasses, Juliet, snorted. "Can we just get someone competent? Or do we need to fly to Paris for that too?" Samantha blinked quickly. "Let me get the manager, sir." "Oh, please do," Charles snapped, smirking. "Maybe they'll teach you how to pronounce sweet before they fire you." The elevator chimed. From the far end of the lobby, footsteps clicked against marble. Calm, measured, powerful. A woman stepped out, dressed in a sleek navy pantsuit, her posture regal, her chin lifted just slightly. The air shifted. Some of the older staff straightened. A bellboy whispered, "It's her." Claire Moreau didn't speak as she approached, not yet. Her eyes swept the scene, Samantha trembling, Charles fuming, Juliet smirking. Claire's gaze lingered on her ex-husband just a beat longer. Charles turned, annoyed. "Finally. Are you the manager here? Good. You need to retrain your entire staff, starting with that one." Claire tilted her head slightly and for the first time spoke. "Mr. Beaumont," she said, voice smooth and crisp, "you just insulted one of my best employees in front of multiple witnesses." He frowned. "I beg your pardon? Who are you?" Claire smiled. "I'm the general manager of this hotel, and also," she paused just long enough to draw blood, "your ex-wife." And in that one instant, the man who thought he owned the room lost all control of it. Long before she wore designer suits and walked through marble lobbies with effortless authority, Claire Moreau was just a woman in love. She met Charles Beaumont at a tech summit in Lyon. He was a guest speaker, sharp-tongued and ambitious, talking about disrupting the old world of finance. She had been in the audience, not as a businesswoman, but as a translator, helping coordinate the event. He was magnetic, the kind of man who knew how to fill a room, who made eye contact like he already owned your secrets. But what drew Claire in wasn't his confidence. It was the rare moment he slipped, when he laughed at his own joke and looked surprised anyone else laughed with him. They had coffee afterward, then dinner, then months of long-distance calls between Paris and Geneva, laughter in cafes, late-night walks by the Seine. When he told her he couldn't imagine life without her, Claire believed him, and so she did what no one in her family expected. She hid her identity. Claire Moreau was the only daughter of Philippe Moreau, founder of the L'Amour Luxe Hotel Group, one of the most exclusive hospitality empires in the world. Her surname could open doors in any capital city, but it could also trap her in a gilded cage. So she told Charles she worked as a hotel language consultant, which was true. She just didn't tell him which hotels. She didn't want to be loved for her last name. She wanted someone to see her, not the power behind her. Charles proposed after 6 months. It wasn't fancy, just him, a ring, and a nervous smile in their tiny Paris apartment. Claire said yes without hesitation. They married quietly. No press, no grand ballroom, just a civil ceremony, champagne, and a promise. For 2 years, Claire lived as Mrs. Beaumont in silence. She used an alias to cut ties with the Moreau name in public records. She cooked. She supported his startup. She lent him money anonymously through a holding firm, just to help him get through tough months. He never knew. She thought love was enough. But the higher Charles climbed, the colder he became. He began to mock her simple tastes, questioned why she didn't do more with her potential. He joked with his colleagues about women who had no ambition, never realizing the woman who scrubbed his kitchen also signed checks that saved his company. Then came the pregnancy. At first, he seemed thrilled. Bought books on fatherhood, picked baby names, promised he'd scale back work. But the further Claire's belly grew, the more distant he became. He started missing doctor appointments, leaving for emergency meetings, ignoring her texts. Claire kept hoping. She held on, until the night her body gave up before her heart did. And that night, while she lay in a hospital bed trying not to lose their child, Charles handed her divorce papers and never looked back. In the early days, Charles Beaumont had been hungry. Not for fame, not for wealth, but for a way out of the life he was born into. He grew up in Manchester's grey corners, where cracked sidewalks and unpaid bills taught him more than any classroom. His father was a mechanic who drank more than he fixed cars. His mother cleaned hotel rooms, always coming home smelling like bleach and regret. Charles swore he'd never end up like them. At first, ambition was his salvation. He studied hard, slept little, and clawed his way into London's business scene with nothing but charm and a ruthless work ethic. People underestimated him. He liked it that way. But when he met Claire, something shifted. She was quiet strength, subtle elegance, an anchor he didn't know he needed. With her, he didn't have to prove anything. And for a while, that was enough. But success is a cruel addiction. Once his startup gained traction, once investors began noticing, Charles changed. Not overnight, but gradually, like a tide swallowing a beach while no one's looking. He started networking more, staying later at events. His wardrobe changed, so did his circle. Champagne replaced coffee, ego replaced curiosity. Claire would try to connect. She'd ask about his day, about the people he worked with. He'd answer with 2 words, scrolling his phone. At dinner parties, he'd interrupt her stories, correct her pronunciation, make jokes that drew laughter at her expense. One night, she overheard him say, "She's sweet, but she's not exactly business material." Claire didn't cry. She just stopped asking. When she told him she was pregnant, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He nodded, kissed her forehead, and returned to his laptop. He didn't come to the first ultrasound, or the second. At 5 months, she fainted from stress and fatigue. The doctor ordered bed rest. Charles barely looked up from his tablet when she told him. "She'll be fine," he said. "Women have babies every day." She stayed in bed alone, listening to the sounds of the city outside their apartment. The man she married was no longer in the room. He hadn't been for months. Then came the night of the gala. Charles had a black tie event, something about mergers and tech ventures. Claire had early contractions. Her doctor told her to go to the hospital immediately. She called him. He declined the call. She texted. No reply. At 11:42 p.m., she was wheeled into emergency care, alone. And at 1:03 a.m., while lying in a hospital bed, connected to IVs, breath shallow, heart crushed, Claire received a text from Charles. "Check your email. I've sent the divorce papers. It's for the best. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." No explanation. No apology. Just a cold, corporate ending to what was once a fairy tale. That was the night Claire Moreau stopped being a wife and began becoming something far more dangerous. Juliette Valois knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. She didn't come from wealth, but she knew how to dress like it, smile like it, walk like it, and most importantly, she knew how to spot a man climbing fast enough to take her with him. She met Charles at a tech panel in Paris. She wasn't invited. She'd snuck in wearing a borrowed designer blazer and a fake press badge. But once inside, she charmed the room with her practiced laugh and wide-eyed curiosity. Charles was surrounded by real investors and business executives. But Juliette stood out, not because she belonged, but because she pretended better than anyone. She asked him one question that night: "What scares you more, failing or being forgotten?" He called her refreshing. They started meeting in private, hotels, back corners of cocktail parties. He called her his secret escape. She called him her ticket out. At first, she played sweet, naive. She asked about his childhood, made him feel like a survivor. She cooked him homemade meals she Googled hours before. She said she didn't understand finance, then memorized his entire pitch deck to impress him. What Juliette didn't say, what she never said, was that she knew his wife. 2 years earlier, she had applied for a front desk role at a luxury hotel in Geneva. Claire Moreau had been the manager at the time. Juliette was caught stealing perfume from the VIP amenity drawer on her second week. Claire didn't humiliate her. She didn't call the police. She simply handed her a dismissal letter and said, "This isn't who you are. Don't let it become who you become." Juliet never forgot the look in Claire's eyes that day. Disappointed, but calm. Like she'd seen too many people lose themselves trying to fake a life that didn't fit. Now, that same Claire was out of the picture. Rumors swirled that she'd gone to the US, broken, childless, forgotten. Juliet stepped in. She redecorated Charles's condo, took over his social calendar, deleted numbers from his phone. Little by little, she made space where Claire had been. She smiled for the cameras, stood by his side at galas, whispered things to stroke his ego. She never really saw your genius. She didn't deserve your ambition. She was jealous of your light. Charles believed it. He wanted to believe it. But what Juliet didn't count on was the quiet power Claire had never revealed, not in words but in legacy. Because Juliet wasn't just playing with a heartbroken woman. She was playing with the bloodline of an empire. And now, standing in that grand hotel lobby in New York, laughing as Samantha Green fumbled with French, Juliet had no idea who was about to walk out of that elevator. But she was about to remember the one woman she never should have crossed. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening. Claire had spent the afternoon rearranging the nursery. Soft beige walls, pale blue curtains, a mobile of tiny clouds spinning above the crib. She'd even ordered a French storybook set, thinking it might be a sweet way to pass on her family's heritage. She was 7 months pregnant, swollen and tired, but glowing in a way only women carrying life could understand. Charles had said he had meetings. Big investors. No phones. He texted earlier. Don't wait up. Claire believed him. She always did. At 10:15 p.m., she took a warm shower, changed into his favorite silk nightgown, and waited, hoping he'd still come home. He didn't. By midnight, she was alone in bed, the baby kicking softly against her ribs like a quiet knock from the inside reminding her, "You're not really alone." But something felt wrong. She hadn't touched Charles's tablet in months. But tonight, it was glowing on his desk, unlocked, a string of emails still open. Curiosity wasn't her nature, but heartbreak was. She sat down, hands trembling, and scrolled. And there it was. A reservation. Hotel Sonore. Presidential suite, under Charles Beaumont's name, checked in 6 hours ago. Attached, a note to the concierge. Please make sure the champagne is chilled. Miss Juliette Valois prefers Moet. Claire stared at the screen, her throat closed. The baby shifted. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She stood, slowly, her hands instinctively wrapping around her stomach. She whispered one sentence out loud, not to Charles, but to her unborn child. "You deserve better than this." An hour later, she was in a cab. The driver said nothing as she gave the hotel name. Maybe he saw the fire in her eyes, or the way her hands clenched into fists over her belly. Maybe he knew better than to ask why a pregnant woman in silk pajamas was going to one of the most expensive hotels in the city at 2 a.m. The lobby lights of the St. Honoré were dimmed for the night, but the receptionist still offered a smile. "Do you have a reservation, madam?" "No," Claire replied calmly. "But my husband does." He checked. "Mr. Charles Beaumont." "Yes, suite 510. Claire nodded. "Please don't call ahead." She took the elevator alone. The hallway smelled of roses and luxury. Her feet ached. Her pulse was thunder in her ears. She didn't knock. She had the override keycard. Charles always bragged about having VIP access. She'd remembered the code. The door clicked open, and there they were. Juliet, laughing in a silk robe too short to cover anything, holding a glass of champagne. Charles, shirtless, mid-joke, froze when he saw Claire in the doorway. Pregnant, furious, radiant with betrayal. "Claire, what the hell are you?" But she wasn't listening. She looked at Juliet, then at Charles, then at herself in the mirrored wall. And in that moment, something inside her broke. Not from weakness, from awakening. Because she finally realized the man she loved was never real. Claire didn't remember how she got back to the apartment. The last thing she recalled was standing in that suite, watching her husband stumble for excuses while his mistress tried to cover herself with a laugh. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown anything. There were no fireworks, just a silence so deep it cracked something inside her. When she opened the apartment door hours later, the sun was rising. She kicked off her heels, one by one, her hands shaking. Her body felt heavy, not just from the pregnancy, but from the weight of knowing she had loved someone who never truly existed. She dropped the keys, sank to the floor, and finally, she cried. Not loud sobs, not wails. Just silent, gutted tears that soaked into the silk nightgown she still wore. The one he used to say made her look like the woman I want to build my empire with. What empire? What man? Her heart didn't feel broken, it felt erased. She stayed on the floor until noon. The doorbell rang. Her assistant Sophia had come by for paperwork Claire forgot to sign. The moment Sophia saw her, makeup smudged, hair a mess, belly trembling, she dropped everything and rushed to her. My God, Claire? What happened? I lost everything, Claire whispered. No, you didn't, Sophia replied gently. You lost someone who didn't deserve to be found. That was the first time Claire felt something stir. But life wasn't done testing her. 2 days later, she collapsed in the bathroom, intense cramping, bleeding. An ambulance rushed her to the hospital. Doctors worked fast, their faces tight with concern. Claire barely heard them through the fog of pain. She was losing the baby. The child she had held onto through betrayal, through silence, through endless nights of waiting. She begged them, please, do everything. She woke up 3 hours later in a white room, an IV in her arm, an oxygen clip on her finger, and no movement in her belly. A nurse came in, eyes soft with sympathy. You're stable now, but I'm so sorry, the baby didn't make it. Claire turned to the window, tears slipping without sound. The city skyline blurred behind her grief. Charles didn't show up. Not once, not a text, not a call. But someone else did. Her father. Philippe Moreau, the man who built an empire from the ground up, walked into that hospital room without a word. He sat beside his daughter and took her hand. You don't have to explain anything, he said. Just come home. Claire didn't answer, but she didn't let go of his hand either. Because in that moment, after betrayal, humiliation, and unbearable loss, she realized she had two choices: stay broken or rebuild from the ashes. Claire had never intended to go back. When she left the hospital, her body was healing, but her spirit felt like broken glass, shattered into too many sharp, glinting pieces to put back together. New York was far, but distance wasn't what she needed. She needed silence. Safety. A place where no one knew her as the wife who got left or the woman who lost her baby. So she boarded a private jet, escorted by her father's security team, and returned to the estate in the French countryside where she grew up. The place where her mother had taught her to walk, where her nanny used to braid her hair and whisper bedtime stories in 3 languages. But even here, she couldn't escape the headlines. Billionaire Charles Beaumont splits from wife during pregnancy. New woman seen at gala with CEO just days after wife's hospitalization. Anonymous insider, Claire was emotionally unstable. Each headline was a dagger, twisted with lies and silence. Claire stared at them in her father's study, her laptop glowing cold light onto her tear-streaked face. Philippe entered quietly. He placed a steaming cup of tea on the desk and sat beside her. You always said you didn't want people to know who you were, he said gently. I didn't want power. Claire replied. I wanted love. You can have both, he said. But now, you have to choose which one saves you. She stayed in the estate for 2 months, and every day she trained. Not her body, but her mind, her resolve, her spirit. She studied the entire operation of L'Amour Luxe hotels, every international branch, every market forecast, every personnel file. She shadowed board meetings, memorized financial reports, spoke to every regional manager. No one knew what she was doing. She refused interviews, denied press requests, avoided social events. Until one morning, a white envelope arrived. It was from the New York branch of L'Amour Luxe, the flagship hotel her family owned but had been run by external executives for years. The general manager had resigned. Scandal. Misuse of funds. The board needed someone to take over, immediately. Claire didn't hesitate. She packed 2 suitcases, boarded the jet again, and returned to the city that had nearly destroyed her. But this time, she wasn't the same woman. No more soft smiles. No more begging for love. No more pretending to be less than who she was. The day she arrived at the hotel, the staff were surprised. Some recognized her, most did not. She didn't announce her title. She simply walked through the front doors, greeted the doorman by name, and headed straight for the executive floor. Within 2 weeks, operations changed. Staff were restructured, policies rewritten, morale lifted, bookings soared. The hotel had a new leader, but no one, not even her assistant, knew the full truth. Because Claire didn't just return as a temporary manager, she returned as the rightful heir. Transformation doesn't always come with music, mirrors, or makeup. Sometimes it starts in silence, with one deep breath, one quiet vow, and the steady decision to never again shrink for someone else's comfort. Claire Moreau didn't need revenge. She needed reclamation. Every morning, she arrived at the hotel 2 hours before anyone else. She walked the halls in flats and soft sweaters, inspecting the linens, checking the lighting, tasting the breakfast pastries herself. Staff began to notice. The new manager wasn't just efficient. She cared. But behind the kindness was precision. Behind the elegance was steel. She no longer responded to emails with pleasantries. She gave instructions with clarity and finality. She didn't smile unless she meant it. And slowly, the woman once broken on the bathroom floor became the woman everyone stood straighter around. Her assistant, Sophia, who had followed her from Paris, was the first to notice the change. "You cut your hair," she said one morning as Claire stepped out of the elevator. Claire ran a hand through the sleek new bob that hugged her jawline. "Too much baggage in the old strands," she said with a wink. But it wasn't just the hair. Claire started wearing color again. Deep emeralds, royal blues, sharp whites that framed her shoulders like armor. Her heels clicked with purpose. Her posture dared people to underestimate her, and punished them when they did. Still, she kept her identity quiet. She didn't want people respecting her because of her last name. She wanted to earn it, one staff member at a time, one flawless day of operations after another. Then came the gala invitation. The Hoteliers' Council was hosting its annual New York Summit, a gathering of investors, developers, executives, the very crowd Charles and Juliet now flaunted themselves in. Claire opened the invite and stared at it for a long moment. Sophia asked, "You don't have to go." "Yes," Claire said softly, "I do." And when she arrived that night, the room stilled. Claire walked in alone. She wore a floor-length black velvet gown with a plunging back. No necklace, no earrings. Just bold red lips and a stare that sliced through the room like silk on a blade. People whispered, "Is that? It can't be." "She looks different." She greeted former allies, former doubters, shook hands with people who once pitied her. Now they watched her with awe. And across the room, Charles saw her. He nearly dropped his glass. Juliet, clinging to his arm, followed his gaze, her face drained. Claire met their eyes briefly. No smile, no wave, just a nod, as if to say, "I see you. And I no longer care." That night, the press didn't talk about Charles's new venture. They talked about the return of a woman no one expected to rise, and how she made every other woman in the room remember what real power looks like. The night after the gala, Claire sat in her office with a glass of wine, watching the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling window. New York pulsed below her, bright, bold, and unaware that one of its loudest egos was about to fall. She wasn't going to make a scene. She was going to make a statement. The very next day, Charles checked into L'Amour Luxe New York with Juliet on his arm. Their arrival was as obnoxious as expected. Designer bags, loud perfume. Snide comments to staff. A small entourage of assistants trailed behind them like lost sheep. Juliet snapped her fingers at a bellboy who was moving too slowly. Charles rolled his eyes when Samantha Green, the front desk clerk, didn't understand his French. Again. "This is absurd," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "How can anyone not speak French in a 5-star hotel?" Samantha flushed. "I'm really sorry, sir. Don't apologize," Juliet cut in. "Just get someone competent." That's when the elevator doors opened. Claire stepped out, wearing cream-colored trousers, a matching blazer, and confidence so quiet it made the air heavier. She walked calmly through the lobby, her eyes locking on the scene unfolding at the front desk. Samantha looked on the verge of tears. Guests were starting to whisper. Claire's heels clicked against the marble floor, like punctuation marks in a speech not yet given. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, voice crisp but even. Charles turned, ready to bark back, and froze. Juliet's mouth parted, confused. "Why is she?" Claire didn't address them. She turned to Samantha. "Take a break, please." Samantha nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, Miss Moreau." Charles blinked. "Miss Moreau?" Claire faced him fully now. "Yes," she said. "Claire Moreau, general manager of this property and chairwoman of the L'Amour Luxe Group as of 2 weeks ago." Gasps, whispering. One of Charles's assistants actually dropped his tablet. Claire didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She gestured toward the front desk. "Mr. Beaumont?" Miss Valois, you are no longer welcome at any property owned by our group. That includes over 35 hotels globally. Juliet laughed awkwardly. You're joking. Claire's eyes narrowed. Do I look like I'm joking? Security didn't need instructions. Two discreet staff members approached from the side, calm but firm. Escort them to retrieve their belongings. They'll be refunded in full. Charles's face burned red. You can't do this. Claire leaned in slightly. I can. And I just did. Guests had gathered. Phones were recording. Somewhere in the background, someone whispered, "Is this real?" And then came the cherry on top. Samantha returned, this time holding a tablet. Miss Moreau, that video, it's gone viral. Claire watched the clip, Charles belittling her employee, Juliet laughing, Claire stepping in with perfect timing. Over 1.2 million views, and counting. Send it to legal, Claire said calmly. We'll need it. And with that she walked away, leaving them drowning in the storm they created. In the days that followed, Claire didn't speak to the press. She didn't issue statements. She didn't need to. The internet spoke for her. The video of Charles's meltdown was everywhere. Morning news, late-night commentary, business blogs. People applauded the calm strength of the hotel CEO who stood up for her employee with elegance and authority. But more than that, they rallied around the story. The woman he abandoned came back stronger. Meanwhile, Charles's empire began to crumble. Investors pulled out. PR firms dropped him. His board called an emergency meeting to vote him out of the very company he once bragged he built from nothing. He tried to fight it, hired lawyers, gave interviews, claimed victimhood. But the receipts were too clear. Too many witnesses, too much arrogance recorded in crystal clear HD. Juliet fared no better. The modeling agency that had once used her face for a fragrance ad now erased her from all campaigns. Photos pulled, endorsements gone. Screenshots of her mocking hotel staff surfaced, and so did her theft history. Her past caught up like a freight train. She disappeared from social media entirely. Meanwhile, inside the L'Amour Luxe New York, Claire called a staff-wide meeting. No press, no cameras, just her and the people who kept the hotel running with grace, even in chaos. I know the past few days have been intense, she said, standing in front of them not just as their boss, but as someone who had once stood exactly where they stood. I've been dismissed, humiliated, underestimated, and I know what it feels like to be treated as less than human. She looked at Samantha. But that ends here. We don't tolerate cruelty, not from guests, not from each other. The room erupted in applause. Some staff wiped tears. Samantha smiled a little stronger this time. Claire turned to Sophia afterward. I want Samantha promoted. To what position? Claire smiled. Guest relations manager and a pay raise. She stayed calm under fire. That's leadership. Then, days later, Claire took one final step toward healing. She visited the cemetery. There, under a blooming dogwood tree, was the tiny headstone. Baby Moreau, loved before born. Claire knelt beside it, laying a single white rose. Her hands trembled, not from pain, but from the overwhelming rush of peace. I built an empire for you, she whispered, and I finally built one for myself, too. A gentle wind rustled the leaves above. No grand music, no thunderclap of justice, just silence, and a mother who had survived the impossible. She stood up taller, stronger. Later that week, she was invited to a televised panel on women in leadership. The host introduced her, Claire Moreau, businesswoman, hotelier, and an icon of grace under fire. She smiled into the camera. And when asked what advice she'd give to women who feel small, erased, betrayed, her answer was simple. Never forget who you are, especially when someone tries to make you forget. Because the most powerful revenge is remembering your worth. Claire Moreau had rebuilt her world, piece by piece. Her name was no longer whispered behind closed doors. It was printed on business covers, spoken in boardrooms, and applauded on stages. But just when she thought the dust had finally settled, an envelope arrived. No name, no return address. Just cream-colored stationery with her name written in block letters across the front, Claire Moreau. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a court summons. Charles was suing her for defamation, for loss of professional reputation, for emotional distress. The man who had left her in a hospital bed with divorce papers now claimed she had ruined his life. Claire read the document twice, then slid it across the desk to Sophia. He's not just desperate, she said calmly. He's dangerous. Sophia frowned. Can he actually win? Claire shook her head. No, but that's not the point. He wants attention. He wants power back. He wants a stage. And she wasn't about to give it to him. Still, the news hit the media like wildfire. Billionaire CEO sues ex-wife for defamation after viral video. Charles Beaumont claims emotional damage from online hate. Is Claire Moreau's revenge too harsh? Claire didn't flinch, at least not in public. But behind closed doors, she felt the fatigue. The weight of constantly having to prove herself. The pressure of being strong, composed, untouchable. One night, after reviewing documents with her lawyers, she sat alone in her penthouse and opened her old journal, the one she hadn't touched since the hospital. Inside were pages written by a different woman. A gentler woman. A woman who used to believe that love was more important than legacy. She missed her. Not the vulnerability, but the softness. The balance. She stared out at the city skyline. The same one she once viewed with tears in her eyes and a baby that never made it into the world. And she made a decision. If Charles wanted a battle, she'd give him one. But not on his terms. She'd do it by showing the world the truth. Not just of what happened between them, but what it meant for every woman who had ever been silenced, gaslit, abandoned, or blamed for surviving. She met with her PR team. "We'll do a feature," she said. "On what?" "On the cost of silence. The price women pay for protecting the egos of men who break them." A documentary crew was hired. Interviews were arranged. Former employees, past colleagues, even Juliet's ex-friends came forward with stories. Stories that painted a very clear picture. Charles's downfall wasn't caused by Claire's revenge. It was caused by his own choices. She gave no speeches, no tears, no personal attacks. She simply presented the facts and let the world judge for itself. And this time, the court of public opinion slammed the gavel harder than any judge could. The documentary premiered on a rainy Thursday night. Claire didn't attend a red carpet. She didn't need applause. She sat in her private screening room with Sophia and a few trusted staff, silent as the opening credits rolled. Silenced. What happens when women fight back. Narrated in Claire's voice, the film opened with footage from the viral hotel incident. Then came images no one had ever seen. Hospital photos, her walking alone down a sterile hallway, and audio of voicemails from Charles that were cold, dismissive, sometimes cruel. "I'm not coming. Handle it yourself. I can't be your emotional support animal. Just sign the damn papers, Claire." One by one, the pieces came together. The betrayal, the abandonment, the loss. And finally, the quiet power she had found when no one else was watching. When the screen went black at the end, Claire didn't say a word. Sophia had tears in her eyes. That was devastating and beautiful. Claire simply nodded. "It's not for me anymore. It's for everyone else." The internet exploded within hours. Stand with Claire trended across every major platform. Celebrities reposted the trailer. Activists quoted her words. Even business leaders who once dismissed her now offered public support. But most of all, women wrote in. Thousands of messages poured into the hotel's inbox. Emails. Handwritten letters. Stories of betrayal, abuse, survival, hope. And in every message, one theme echoed. "You made me feel seen." Claire read every letter. She wrote back to as many as she could. And then, something extraordinary happened. The L'Amour Luxe board, once dominated by aging billionaires who cared more about profits than people, unanimously voted to back Claire's leadership permanently. They didn't just want her as chairwoman, they wanted her vision, her voice, her values. So, she created something new. A division inside the hotel group focused on dignity and hospitality, mandatory leadership training, zero-tolerance policies for guest abuse, and a whistleblower fund to protect employees everywhere. She called it the Samantha Initiative, named after the young receptionist Charles had insulted. When Samantha heard, she cried. "I was just doing my job," she said. "No," Claire replied. "You reminded me what mine really is." The change made headlines. But not everyone was celebrating. Charles was still spiraling. His lawsuit quietly disappeared. No lawyer would touch it anymore. And Juliet? She was spotted working part-time at a boutique in Paris, ducking from paparazzi, hiding behind dark glasses. The empire they tried to build on cruelty and arrogance had collapsed. And Claire? She stood taller than ever. Not just as a CEO, not just as a woman who survived, but as someone who turned pain into power. And finally, for the first time in years, she stood in front of a mirror, touched her scarred heart gently, and said out loud, "I'm proud of you. Because true victory isn't in revenge, it's in rebuilding what they tried to destroy. 6 months after the documentary aired, L'Amour Luxe Hotels was no longer just a name on gold-lettered doors. It had become a symbol of quiet strength, of second chances, of dignity reborn from ashes. Claire stood on the rooftop of the New York branch, overlooking the skyline that had once broken her. Now it bowed beneath her vision. Beside her, Samantha Green smiled. "You know what I realized?" she said, her voice calm. "That night, when he insulted me, I didn't cry because of what he said. I cried because no one ever stood up for me before." Claire looked at her. "That won't happen again. Not on my watch." The Samantha Initiative had gone global. Over 3,000 hospitality workers had enrolled in leadership courses Claire launched under the program. Dozens of hotels rewrote their policies after consulting her team. A growing fund was now supporting female entrepreneurs who had once been silenced in corporate systems. But Claire didn't just stay behind a desk. She visited shelters, hosted workshops, sat with women who still trembled when telling their stories. And every time she listened, her voice got stronger. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to remember from a place of power. One afternoon, she received a message from a woman named Elise, a single mother working night shifts in London who had watched the documentary. "I watched your story while folding laundry at 2 a.m. I haven't told anyone what my ex did to me, not even my daughter. But now, maybe I will. Maybe I can." Claire wrote back. Not a formal message. Not from a CEO, just a woman to another woman. "You don't need to tell the world," she typed, "but never again tell yourself it didn't matter, because you mattered. You still do." That was the real empire Claire was building, one heart at a time. But even with success, the shadows lingered. She sometimes woke in the middle of the night, hand on her stomach, forgetting, just for a second, that the child she carried was gone. Grief doesn't leave, it evolves. And one night, standing alone in the nursery she had kept closed for over a year, she turned the lights on. It wasn't a shrine, it wasn't a grave, it was a room full of hope. And this time she didn't cry. She opened the window, let the wind blow through, and whispered, "You were the beginning of my strength. Thank you." Claire didn't remarry. She didn't rush to rewrite the chapter with a new prince. Because this story, it was never about rescuing. It was about rising. She walked into boardrooms, into panels, into the world, not needing a crown or a man's last name to define her worth. And when asked what drove her success, she always answered the same. "A heartbreak gave me purpose. A betrayal gave me clarity, but I built this life with my own 2 hands." Because when the world told her she was finished, she dared to begin again. It started with a letter, not an email, not a voicemail. A letter, handwritten, ink faded slightly, folded too many times, as if the person behind it had nearly thrown it away a dozen times before finally sending it. It came to the hotel, addressed in careful cursive. "To Miss Claire Moreau. I don't deserve your time, but I hope I've earned your attention. CB." Claire read it once, then twice, then tucked it away in the back of her desk drawer without replying. For weeks, she told herself she wouldn't think about it, that it didn't matter, that she was done with ghosts. But regret has a strange way of echoing. A few days later, her assistant Sophia entered the office slowly. "Claire, there's someone in the lobby. Tell them I'm in meetings." "It's Charles." Claire didn't look up. "He says he's not here to fight or to explain, just to say one thing." Silence. Claire stared at her hands for a moment, then without a word stood up and walked to the elevator. The lobby was quiet, early morning calm before the rush. Charles sat alone on the velvet bench, no entourage, no designer suit, just a gray jacket, wrinkled collar, and the weight of a man who had finally realized what he'd thrown away. He stood when he saw her. "Claire, thank you for coming." "I didn't come for you," she said calmly. "I came for closure." He nodded. "That's fair." He looked older, not in years, but in guilt. The sparkle of arrogance in his eyes was gone, replaced with something raw, real. "I've watched everything," he said. "The documentary, the interviews, even the hotel footage." Claire folded her arms. "Why now?" "Because I ran out of excuses," he whispered. "And because I needed you to know. I remember the night you left. Every second of it. The look in your eyes. I didn't know I'd already lost everything until you were gone." Claire didn't blink. "I didn't come here to beg for forgiveness," he continued. I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to say this out loud. You were always better than me, and I spent too long trying to make you feel small because I knew you were always the real power." For the first time in years, Claire saw him, not the man who betrayed her, but the broken shell of someone who'd finally been humbled by his own downfall. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just took a breath and said, "I don't hate you, I just stopped needing you." He nodded, eyes wet. "I hope you find peace, Charles," she added, "but that doesn't mean you get a second chapter here." He smiled sadly. "I figured, but thank you for hearing me." And then he left. No fanfare, no paparazzi, just a quiet exit from a story he no longer belonged to. Claire turned to Sophia as she returned to the office. "Do you believe people can change?" she asked softly. Sophia smiled. "Only when they lose everything and learn to rebuild from humility." Claire sat at her desk and stared out the window. She had her empire, her peace, her truth. And now, finally, her past no longer had the power to hurt her. Spring arrived in New York like a long-awaited exhale. The city bloomed with energy, tulips lined the streets, and laughter returned to the sidewalks. Inside L'Amour Luxe, Claire had just wrapped a panel on ethical leadership. She stood near the elevator, listening to her assistant, Sophia, rattle off tomorrow's agenda. 2 media interviews, 1 podcast request, a board call with London. Oh, and a meeting request from a Mr. Nathaniel Grant. Claire paused. "Who?" Sophia blinked. "Investor. Recently acquired 3 boutique hotels in Europe. He's requesting a sit-down. Says he admires your work." Claire raised a brow. "I don't do flattery meetings. I checked his credentials. He's legitimate." "All right. Pencil it in for 15 minutes. The next day, at precisely 9 a.m., Claire entered the executive lounge and paused. Nathaniel Grant stood at the window, tall, well-dressed, with graying temples and quiet poise. He turned around, offering a handshake that was firm but not performative. "Miss Moreau, thank you for meeting me." "Let's be honest," she said, sitting down. "You're not just here for investment talk." He smiled. "Fair. I saw your documentary. It didn't just change my business. It changed my perspective." Claire didn't respond immediately. Compliments made her cautious. Nathaniel leaned forward, his voice thoughtful. "I used to think profit came first, until I realized broken systems break people. Now I want to build something different, and you're already doing that." Claire studied him. No ego, no charm tricks, just sincerity. She didn't fully trust it, but she didn't dismiss it either. They talked. 15 minutes became 45, then an hour. By the end, Claire found herself enjoying the conversation. Later, Sophia asked, "Well, impressed?" Claire gave a rare, soft smile. "I didn't hate it." Over the next few weeks, Nathaniel and Claire continued crossing paths, sometimes professionally, sometimes not. He sent her a book on French architecture with a note. "Thought you'd appreciate the spine more than the story." She invited him to a hotel walkthrough, curious how he treated the staff. He greeted everyone by name. He listened. He didn't perform kindness. He lived it. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they sat on the rooftop, wineglasses in hand. The city twinkled below. "You know," Nathaniel said, "most people meet in coffee shops or airports. We met in a storm you didn't even know I was watching." Claire looked at him. "I wasn't looking." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I stayed." She didn't respond. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, watching the wind play with the ends of her hair. For the first time in years, she didn't feel guarded, or afraid, or haunted. She just was. Nathaniel didn't ask to fix her. He asked to know her. And maybe, just maybe, that was the difference. Claire stood, collecting her things. As she walked past him, she said one thing. "Next time, don't bring wine. Bring stories." He smiled. "I've got plenty." Because sometimes, healing doesn't mean erasing the past. Just finding someone who can walk beside you as you write the rest of the story. Trust was no longer something Claire gave. It was something people earned. Slowly, deliberately, and only after proving they knew the difference between presence and performance. And yet, Nathaniel Grant had become a part of her days. Not in a loud, sweeping romance, not in declarations, but in quieter things. He sent her coffee when he knew she worked late. Checked in on Samantha's new initiative with genuine curiosity. He never interrupted, never talked over her in meetings. He always asked if she had the time, never assumed. One afternoon, while reviewing expansion plans in her office, Sophia said with a sly smile, You know he rearranged his entire Europe tour just to be here this week. Claire kept her eyes on the papers. We have a lot of projects in motion, and none of them involve your heart. Claire didn't answer, because deep down she knew. Letting Nathaniel close meant risking everything she'd rebuilt. She had spent years clawing her way back from betrayal. Her power was forged in independence. Her name was no longer attached to a man. She was herself, finally. But when Nathaniel invited her to a private gallery opening, no press, no cameras, just something beautiful, she hesitated, then said yes. The gallery was dimly lit, filled with quiet shadows and bold colors. Modern, raw, unexpected. Claire walked beside him, heels clicking softly on polished floors, stopping before a sculpture of a cracked porcelain figure stitched back together with gold. Kintsugi, Nathaniel said, watching her watch it. The art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The idea is, the break becomes part of the beauty. Claire's throat tightened. He didn't say more. Didn't need to. Later that night, they walked through Central Park under the lamplight. No guards, no staff. Just two people who had seen the world's sharpest edges. I need to ask you something, Nathaniel said as they approached the fountain. Claire braced herself. Go ahead. Have you forgiven him, Charles? She stopped walking. I forgave myself, she said quietly, for staying too long, for loving blindly, for thinking silence would protect me. And him? I don't carry him anymore, that's enough. Nathaniel nodded. Then maybe there's room to carry something else. Claire looked at him, not the businessman, not the potential partner, just the man who had walked beside her without trying to fix her pain. And she realized she wasn't afraid of being hurt again. She was afraid of hoping again. But hope didn't feel so heavy anymore. A few days later, back in her office, Samantha knocked on her door. There's a man in the lobby asking if he can take you to lunch. Says he's not sure if he should have just texted. Claire smiled. Tell him I'll be down in 5. Samantha paused. You trust him? Claire thought for a moment. I trust myself. That's more than enough. She picked up her coat, smoothed her blazer, and caught her reflection in the mirror. Not just polished, not just powerful, peaceful. Because loving again wasn't weakness. It was choosing joy, even after knowing the cost. The morning started like any other. Claire sat at her office desk, reviewing a final draft of a keynote speech she was scheduled to give at a global leadership summit in Tokyo. The Samantha Initiative had just hit its 1-year milestone. Hotels across the world were replicating her employee-first model. Numbers were climbing, but more importantly, so was respect. And then the email arrived. Subject urgent. Internal audit red flags. Private from Internal Compliance Department. She opened it, eyebrows narrowing. Attached was a financial report with unusual expense patterns in the Paris branch, specifically from an account under the oversight of Sophia. Claire's stomach dropped. She read through the flagged entries. Private car services, designer purchases, dinners that had nothing to do with business, all signed off under a discretionary travel budget. At first, she wanted to believe it was a mistake, but the paper trail was undeniable. That afternoon, she called Sophia into her office. The woman who had once held Claire as she wept in a hospital now stood in front of her with red lipstick and an unreadable expression. Claire didn't speak right away. She just slid the file across the desk. Sophia glanced at it, then looked away. You knew I'd find it, Claire said quietly. Sophia exhaled slowly. I thought you'd understand. Understand what? That you used my name to fund your luxury weekend trips? I gave you everything, Sophia snapped. Years of loyalty, of cleaning up after you, watching you rebuild while I stayed in the background. I thought, maybe I deserved a taste. Claire's voice didn't rise. That was the part that scared Sophia. This isn't about what you deserved. It's about what you took. Sophia looked away. Claire stood. You're suspended pending investigation. Legal will be in touch. Sophia blinked. You're really going to throw it all away over a few invoices? Claire leaned in, voice sharp but calm. You didn't just take money. You stole trust. And in my world, that's worth more than anything in a bank. Sophia left without another word, but Claire sat frozen in her chair. She had faced betrayal before. From lovers, from boardrooms, from strangers, but not from someone who once knew her pain. Nathaniel arrived that evening to take her to dinner. She canceled. I just need quiet tonight, she texted. He replied, I'll leave dinner at your door. No questions, just here. She smiled faintly through the ache. Later she stood by her window, watching city lights flicker against the glass. This betrayal was different. Not brutal, not loud, but personal. Yet even now, she knew what to do. Not collapse, not rage, just recalibrate, rebuild. Because betrayal doesn't always break you. Sometimes it sharpens your edges, so you never forget where the weak spots are. The news hadn't broken yet, but it would. Internal investigations couldn't be kept quiet for long, especially not when the accused was Sophia Lefebvre, Claire's right hand, her most visible ally, the woman who had stood beside her through every step of her public resurrection. Claire's PR team was already panicking. "We need a statement," one of them said. "Something neutral, controlled. Emphasize how much you value your staff, maybe even hint that it's being exaggerated." "No," Claire said. They all fell silent. She stood by the window of the main boardroom, arms crossed, her face calm but unreadable. "I won't cover this up. Not even a little." "But Claire," her lawyer interrupted gently, "if you go public and confirm Sophia's misconduct, it reflects poorly on your leadership. People will ask, 'How didn't you see it?'" "I did," Claire replied. "Eventually, and now I'll show them what I do when I see the truth." The next morning, Claire walked into the press conference alone. No notes, no podium, just her. Cameras clicked, reporters called out, she raised a hand and the room quieted. "I founded the Samantha Initiative to protect employees from abuse, to hold leadership accountable, not just when it's convenient, but when it's hardest." She paused. "This week, we discovered financial misconduct involving someone from my inner circle. Someone I trusted. I won't name them. That's for legal proceedings. But I will say this, our integrity must remain stronger than our image." Gasps, murmurs. Some of the press had expected a deflection, maybe even a tearful defense. Not this. Claire continued. "Leadership doesn't mean perfection. It means accountability. I was betrayed, but that doesn't make me weak. What would make me weak is pretending it didn't happen." Then she stepped away. No further comment. The media exploded. Claire Moreau exposes internal betrayal, refuses to hide behind PR. The woman who took down her ex now faces her own team's collapse. Power meets integrity, Claire's hardest stand yet. Public opinion was divided at first, but within 48 hours, something shifted. Employees across the globe began sharing their support. "She didn't protect the abuser, she protected us." One comment read, "She taught me that silence isn't strength. Truth is." Then, something unexpected happened. Nathaniel released a public statement. "As someone who has worked alongside Claire Moreau, I want the world to know her leadership isn't just visionary, it's honest, and that's the rarest kind of power." Within days, her investors reaffirmed their support. Her board sent her a handwritten note. "Your truth built this empire, and your courage just made it unbreakable." That night, alone in her penthouse, Claire opened a bottle of wine. No celebration, just reflection. She had weathered storms before, but this was different. This was about choosing values over comfort. She sat on her balcony as the wind danced through her hair, no longer carrying the weight of perfection, just the quiet strength of a woman who tells the truth, even when it costs her. Because real leadership isn't what you build when everyone's watching, it's what you protect when no one is. It started with a letter, again. But this time, it wasn't anonymous or threatening. It came from a small village in Morocco. Handwritten, folded with care. Inside, a message that read, "I watched your story on a broken television in our community center. I'm a housekeeper. My manager tried to fire me for refusing to work overtime without pay. I showed him your documentary. He backed down. Thank you, Claire. Munia, age 42. Claire read it once. Then again. This was no longer about lawsuits, hotels, or headlines. It was legacy. She placed the letter beside dozens of others she had collected in a private box. Stories from women in Bangkok, Cape Town, Buenos Aires, stories of quiet rebellion, of dignity reclaimed, all sparked not by her wealth, but by her voice. Later that week, her team presented data. Employee retention across L'Amour Luxe hotels had risen by 23%, complaint filings dropped, guest satisfaction was up. And for the first time in industry history, a luxury hotel chain was nominated for a Human Dignity in Employment Award by a global watchdog group. Samantha, now overseeing the initiative's expansion in Asia, sent a voice message. "You changed their lives, Claire. You changed mine. I hope you know that." Claire sat at her desk, staring at the skyline. She had come so far from that hospital bed, from the sound of papers hitting the floor and a man's footsteps walking away. And yet, there was one more thing she needed to do. She scheduled a visit, not to a boardroom, not to a gala, to a quiet community shelter in Brooklyn, where her foundation had funded emergency housing for women fleeing domestic abuse. There, among peeling walls and donated blankets, she met a woman named Carla. Mid-30s, eyes tired, arm bruised. Carla didn't know who Claire was at first, but when she did, she gasped softly. "You're the woman. The one who stood up to him in the hotel. You said we don't have to be small to survive." Claire knelt beside her. "No," she said gently. "You just have to remember you were never small to begin with." Carla cried. So did Claire. Not because of pain, because of resonance. That night, Claire didn't return to her penthouse. She stayed behind after hours, serving soup in the shelter kitchen, folding donated clothes. No cameras, no PR, just presence. When Nathaniel called asking how her day had gone, she simply said, "It reminded me who I built all this for." And he understood. As she stood in front of the mirror that night, one of the small ones nailed to a shelter bathroom wall, she didn't see a CEO. She didn't see the ex-wife of a billionaire. She saw the girl who once believed her worth depended on someone else's love. And the woman who proved herself wrong. Because power isn't always loud, sometimes it's quiet. And that's what makes it last. 1 year later, the ballroom of the International Leadership Summit in Geneva shimmered in gold. CEOs, politicians, artists, activists, all gathered beneath one chandeliered ceiling to witness the crowning moment of the night, the Global Human Dignity Award. For the first time in its 32-year history, it would be awarded to a hotelier, and not just any hotelier, Claire Moreau. She sat at a round table near the stage, dressed in midnight blue satin, her posture as poised as ever, but her eyes softer now. Beside her, Nathaniel offered a quiet smile, gently squeezing her hand beneath the table. "And now," the host announced, "a woman who redefined what it means to lead, who turned personal betrayal into public transformation, and who gave dignity a global platform." The audience rose as Claire walked to the stage. Applause thundered, phones flashed, but Claire heard none of it. She was somewhere else. She was back in the hospital bed, her fingers trembling as she signed divorce papers while a heartbeat monitor beeped. She was alone on the rooftop that first night in New York, wondering if she'd made a mistake starting over. She was standing at the hotel front desk, watching a man she once loved belittle a young woman. And now, here she stood, unbroken, unapologetic, unstoppable. She took the mic, voice clear but warm. "I used to think survival was enough," she began, "that getting through the storm meant the storm was over. But I learned something different. Survival is just the beginning. What you do with the pain, that's your legacy." She scanned the room. "I was betrayed, yes, I lost things I'll never get back, but I gained something greater. Clarity, purpose, and the strength to build a world where no woman has to earn respect by suffering first." Applause again. Some guests stood, tears in their eyes. Claire smiled, but not for the cameras. She smiled for herself, and for the little girl she used to be. The one who always thought she had to stay quiet to be loved. After the ceremony, she stepped out onto the balcony, away from the lights, the noise, the world. Nathaniel joined her minutes later. "You know," he said, "people will remember this speech for decades." Claire looked up at the sky. "I don't care about decades. I care about tonight." He leaned in. "So what does tonight feel like?" She exhaled. "Peace." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The wind picked up, brushing a lock of hair across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear and laughed, gently, freely. She was no longer a story of revenge. She was a story of rise, of reclaiming, of writing the final chapter in her own name. Claire Moreau turned back toward the ballroom where hundreds waited. But she walked slowly, because she was no longer chasing anything. She was already everything she needed to be. So, that's the end of her story. And if you're still here, right now, then maybe something in this journey touched your heart, even in the smallest way. Maybe it reminded you of something you've been through, or someone you're still becoming. Let's pause together for just a second. What Claire's story teaches us is that pain doesn't define us, how we rise from it does. The betrayal, the silence, the loss, they're real. But as the Stoics say, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. When we face what breaks us and choose to rebuild anyway, that's where the power begins. You don't have to wear armor to be strong. You just have to keep showing up for yourself every single day. So if this story stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe, not just for us, but to help someone else who might need this moment of clarity too. We're in this together. And your story? It's still being written.